This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Coming up on the payoff. I really do. I do this podcast for you because I love sobriety and I want you to get the best messages about sobriety possible. That's not true. I mean, come on. I do it like most things. It makes me feel good, but I do love carrying the message. And speaking of me being selfish, this is a reflection of that today. While so many of these podcasts are for you, this one is for me. John Delong, we get into it, how he came into my life, but I'll just tell you this. He's a guy who myself and many guys my age and older and younger really think highly of. An amazing writer, NBA writer is how he came into my life, covering the Charlotte Hornets. He's done it for many years as a sports writer. Is retired now. He has been sober for 40 years. He's got amazing stories about sobriety. And for me, of course, he's got amazing stories about covering sports. And when you fuse the two, it is heaven for me. And the book is out, by the way. It's called And My Name is John. And here's a guy who could have written a book about Michael Jordan, Dean Smith, the Charlotte Hornets, you name it, Chris Paul. And he has written a book about sobriety. And I'm thrilled to share it with you. And I'm thrilled to share this conversation with John. A link to the book, it's in the bio of the show notes. Go ahead, check it out, buy it. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. And it'd be a good idea to get it. Be a great Christmas gift. All right, coming up, my main man, John Delong. But first, Kevin Souza. Oh, man, I'm so happy to do this with you, dude.
Oh, I look forward to it. It's always good to talk to you.
Well, it's been too long. And if you don't mind, we'll start right away because it's like a casual, natural conversation. So John DeLong came, I could just speak, I always like to add my context and my experience. In 2004, I got my first real job working in sports at the Charlotte Bobcats at the time. And I can remember, JD, you were writing for the Winston-Salem Journal, as you did for so many years. And now you were back covering the team because the NBA was back. You had been covering the Panthers and sports all over the world, but the NBA was back. And you were back covering the beat for the Bobcats. And I was in that makeshift media room at the Charlotte Coliseum. And if you remember, Miss Phyllis, who was in charge of the media dining, the meals, and I remember she pointed over, she goes, "That's John DeLong." I was like, "Really?" She was like, "Yeah." I was like, "That's him?" And I remember it was a huge deal to have the NBA back in Charlotte, regardless of the product that was on the floor. It just was cool. And to have characters like you back on the regular meant so much to so many people. And I got a chance to, forge a relationship with you, having no idea that our paths would cross again in a much different fashion now and on a much deeper level. And we're talking about sobriety, which is just so cool.
Yeah, I didn't know at the time that you had been sober.
Well, I wasn't yet, I wasn't. I didn't get sober till 2011. I was in the grips at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
You faked pretty good.
What'd you say?
You faked it pretty good.
Well, that's what we do, right? For as long as we can, right?
Yeah.
All right, let's go back to the beginning of your story. In the book, And My Name is John, which you can get on Amazon, pretty much anywhere you get your books. It's called And My Name is John. Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Blessings of Sobriety.
And My Name is John, The Blessings of Sobriety. And your family tree did not have addiction running through it at all. What was your early memories of childhood and then ramping up to when you took that first drink?
Well, I had an uncle who was from Germany, and he drank beer like water. And he was my favorite uncle, and so I couldn't wait until finally I could drink. So I looked up the people who drank, and my parents didn't drink. And so But my dad was the basketball referee, and he would referee basketball games, and then all the referees on Friday night would go and get together after their games. And so everyone else drank, and he was the only one to get a Diet Coke. And so I looked up to those guys so much. So from the time I was 10 or so, I couldn't wait until I got to drink. And he would give me, my uncle would give me a sip here and there. Finally, a whole beer, like that. So the progression started for me when I was 10 or 12.
Yeah, was there for me, it was always like my Uncle Marty and my dad, and they would have some friends over, and there was something very romantic to me about alcohol and about drinking, and they'd sit around and watch Johnny Carson, and it seemed like they were having so much fun. I didn't bear witness to some of the underbelly of a lot of that stuff after I went to bed. But for you, was it similar? Did you find it like an attractive piece?
Right, absolutely, yeah. Like I say, I couldn't wait until I could start drinking because all I saw was the glamorous side. I didn't see the bad side at all.
So when did you take that first drink, and what was it like?
Well, when I finally got out on my own, I was a junior in high school, and some of the other guys on the baseball team would get out, and we would actually go into a field and sit there and start a bonfire or whatever and sit around and drink. My first drunk was as a junior in high school. And I remember I got a six-pack and drank 4.5 of it, and then couldn't drink more than 4.5. So I poured out the half that I was on and had one beer left, and I gave it to somebody else. But, yeah, that was my junior year in high school.
Do you remember how you felt? And I always tell people it was really because around the same time as you, I think I was a sophomore. That was, and I grew up a Catholic kid, right? But that was my first spiritual experience when I drank, and now talking to folks and just having my experience, knowing that that's a different feeling than most people have the first time that they drink. What did it do for you?
Well, it didn't get me as drunk as I thought it was because, like I say, it was only 4.5. The thing I remember about that was I was expecting to get sick the next morning. I was expecting to have twists and turns in the bed that night, but none of that happened. So that enabled me to go ahead and start drinking a six-pack. And back then, a six-pack of beer, I drank Stroh's mostly.
Stroh's, okay.
Yeah. So back then, a six-pack was like $1.16. So my parents would give me $1 to go to the bowling alley, supposedly that night, and we would go scramble up 16 cents from there for so it's hard to believe that beer was that cheap back then, but it was, like I say, it was a Cincinnati beer, a local beer, and I loved that taste. I absolutely loved the taste of Stroh's. It was unique. It was different than Budweiser or something like that, and I loved my Stroh's.
When did you mentioned, because for me too, it was sports was a central part of my life, and it always has been, but it did sort of start to take a back seat to alcohol, because alcohol became, it was first in line once that started to hit me. And at the time I didn't really understand that, but my whole life started to revolve around this liquid. How did that affect your matriculation through high school and then into college? Did you see your priorities change at all?
Oh, absolutely. And I went to North Carolina State. I grew up in Chillicothe, Ohio, but I went to North Carolina State. And I remember from the very word go, I was drinking every night in college. And the fact of the matter is, I went to college 5 years at NC State and didn't graduate. So I had put my drinking ahead of everything. And then the one thing about it was I had never smoked pot when high school or anything like that. Once I smoked pot and saw that you could get screwed up in a minute's time, that's when I started drinking liquor along with the beer. So, yeah, my college career was the priority was drinking from the word go.
So you're at NC State, you start to drink, you're smoking pot, and I love that. I had a very familiar experience like to yours, very similar. Like I remember like, oh, I can smoke pot. And for me also like other stuff came into play, like harder drugs like cocaine but
oh wow.
Yeah. And it was like this quick fix, right, John? Like I was like, wow, like I can be feeling like one way and then I can put stuff in my body and I can do a 180 and feel totally different. And of course there was that for me too, there was that alcoholic gene. Like it was all through my dad's family. And so my mom warned me about it. But then when I started to get involved, you know, the bus has already left the station at that point. And I'm curious about your experience though, as far as, were you writing in college? Were you working in sports at all then? Like, and who are we talking? NC State, like Norm Sloan, NC State, or are we moving towards like Jimmy V?
The year there was David Thompson's sophomore year.
Okay.
So they went 47-0 that year, and then they won the national championship. But for me, this is an example of God doing for me what I could not do for myself. When I was in high school, I took a class called Orientation for College. And one of the requirements was you had to apply to 5 different colleges. So I applied to Ohio State, Ohio U, and Miami of Ohio. Then I had 2 colleges left. So kind of flippantly, I applied to Duke and I applied to NC State because I was an ACC basketball fan. NC State was the first school to accept me. So I wrote a letter to the sports information director, and I said, I don't know that I'm going to NC State, but if I do, I need to pick up a few bucks on the side. Could I work in the sports information office for you? Could I be a student assistant? He wrote me back and said, we can't pay you cash, but we could put you on athletic scholarship.
Whoa.
So at that point, there was no doubt I was going to NC State. And so, yeah, they put me on room and board and out-of-state tuition and books and everything like that. And so my 5 years in college were working at the sports information department.
And so what exactly were you doing? Were you sidling up to players and coaches and did you start to understand, man, this is something I want to do?
Oh, absolutely, yes. And then when I got out of school, I went to the Atlantic Coast Conference as the intern in the sports information department. So I worked for the legendary Peter Francis in Greensboro.
Yeah. Man, so this is an entree into a very interesting, exciting life. And as this is going on, again, like, did you ever graduate college?
No, I didn't. I had the hours, but I didn't have the grade point average.
So, but nevertheless, and this is back, you know, we're going back to a little bit of a different time. It didn't quite matter as much, right? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah.
And so you get this job working for the ACC. What is the drinking life, like at that point in time?
You know, I went to it was I went you you're in a now. And I just was a newspaper article saying ACC employee busted on drug charges.
Yeah.
You know, I tried to cut it back to a 6-pack a week, but as we know, it's a progressive disease, and I lasted on the 6-pack about a month probably, and then it was off to the races even more again.
What does off to the races look like?
Look like the rum every night, already by then. And some nights I would just drink beer. I think Stroh's was in North Carolina by then, so I could still drink my Stroh's.
How are you keeping up with work and relationships with family? Did you notice any of those start to fray?
Well, at work, I went in hungover every day.
Yeah.
One thing about Peter, he was a night owl. So he wouldn't come in until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I had to be in at 9. So normally I was functionable by 1 o'clock when he got in there. Now, as far as my family, they knew there was a problem, but they were up in Ohio where they didn't know how bad it was. And like at Christmas, I would go home at Christmas and I would not drink for 4 days, and I would put up this big facade that I didn't have any problem. And they wanted to believe that because they did believe that. But yeah, back then that's kind of the way it was.
And so how does this monster start to take control of your life and move you? For me, it was the gift of desperation. I mean, truly, like I had nothing left. And I was out of moves, and I literally just, I went to rehab and started with 12 steps after that because I had nowhere else to go. Little did I know it would save my life and then give me this amazing one, right? But yeah, right. It's so cool. But for you, what did that bottom look like before you start now? I mean, I guess what did the bottom look like, and what phase in your life were you in when that happened?
I was working for the High Point Enterprise in High Point, North Carolina, and it was drinking every day. It was whatever chance I got to drink, I was drinking. It was a fifth of bourbon at that point. It was Barton's Reserve. I don't think they even make Barton's Reserve anymore. But anyway, drinking every day. Then March 31st, 1987 is my sobriety date. And on March 30th that year was the Final Four where Keith Smart hit the jump shot to give Indiana the national championship.
In New Orleans.
Yeah, in New Orleans. And so what I did was I went on the drunk to end all drunk. I started drinking there during the game. Then I went out afterwards. And I got so drunk that I wound up in the hospital. Okay. So I remember laying in that hospital bed, just crying and crying and crying with the IVs in my arm and all that kind of stuff. And I said, this crap has to end immediately. This is not about slowing down anymore. This is not about just doing stupid stuff anymore. This crap has to stop immediately.
Okay, hold on. So let's go backwards. Let's go backwards real quick. I want to jump in because I don't mean to go all over the place, but ramping up or going down to this situation, you are a great writer and you're a great reporter. And
well, thank you.
No, you are. I mean, that's everybody that knows you and has read your stuff knows that. But let's go back. You're at the High Point Enterprise. Are you drinking while you're going to events? Like, is anybody? I had a real come to Jesus, JD. I was back in town, and I don't think you were with I think the Winston-Salem Journal wasn't on the beat anymore for the Bobcats. I came back. Right. I came back to Charlotte after I'd left to work for the Sixers in PR. Now I'm in radio, and my addiction is in full. I mean, it's out of control. And I remember drinking before a Bobcats game, and I had to go there to work a radio broadcast. And Tom McGinnis, the Sixers radio guy, pulled me aside and was like, have you been drinking today? And I remember I lied to him. Yeah, I lied to him. And I said, no, I haven't. He didn't buy it. And he just said, you need to respect the craft and you need to be careful. And it hit me right between the eyes. Did you have any moments like that? Because you're around some pretty impressive figures. I mean, I imagine you're covering MJ and all this. And did anyone ever stop you and say, hey, John, what's going on here?
Well, that was early. Peter was one of them that did that. By the time I started covering the Hornets, I had been sober before that. you know.
Uh-huh.
But I never drank on the job.
Okay.
I always waited until after I was done, and that motivated me to get done as quick as possible. But yeah, I would cover a game at Duke, and then I would drive home after the game. I would get home about midnight, and I would drink till 4 o'clock in the morning. You know, so that's how I did it back then.
And so you were in the hospital in New Orleans. You were in New Orleans, right?
No, I was in High Point.
Okay, so you're in High Point.
Carolina. Yeah, I was covering Carolina at the time, and they lost to Syracuse in the regional final. So I would have been in New Orleans, and I was just at breaking in at that point. But I was in High Point on my last drunk, wound up in the hospital. Then they said, we're not going to let you out unless you agree to go to rehab. And I'm like, yes, I need to go to rehab. So went straight there from the hospital, and the next 30 days were the most important 30 days of my life, no doubt about it. And that's where I got the beginnings of the program, and that's the last time I drank.
What started to change for you, and how did it start to change when you get to treatment? And then you get engaged in a 12-step program.
Yeah, well, good things started happening to me almost immediately. I remember finding $20 bills in my pants. A year or two of drinking, I was bouncing checks on Wednesday to get my liquor until Friday on payday. You know, all my credit cards were cut off. So I had no money, and here I am in treatment finding $20 bills in my clothes, you know, like that. So that was one example. The fact is, good things started happening immediately. But the real turning point for me was when I got into the program, when I started sizing up the 12 steps, I looked at the first step and I said, yes, that's me. I'm totally powerless over alcohol and my life is unmanageable. So I feel like I took the first step before I even knew what the first step was. You know, I took the first step laying in that hospital bed with the IVs in my arm, you know. But the real kicker was I saw that God in the third step and my heart just sank. I didn't want any part of God. I put him on the side burner the whole time I had drank. And so my heart sank. But by the time I had done the second step, then I was ready to take the third step.
Yeah.
So it happened somewhere in there about the second step is when it all started happening.
Well, how magical are the 12 steps? I mean, they're made so perfectly for a drunk like me. Like, all right, in this one, you just have to become willing. You don't have to do anything, right? Just like become willing. And so, then it's like, you know, it's a magical program. And it is, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was divinely inspired. When do you start to take these steps? Are you making meetings? Like, are you still working in High Point? Like, what exactly is happening?
Well, when I got out of treatment, they would take us to a couple meetings a week. So my first meetings were actually while I was in rehab. But when I got out, I committed to 90 meetings in 90 days. And I didn't know if I could actually do that or not, but it turned out I got my 90th meeting somewhere in the 60 days mark, 67, something like that. I had the world's greatest sponsor. They had come, he and his wife had come to the hospital to do a 12-step call for me. I didn't know them at all. They're the ones that got me arranged to get into treatment and everything. So when I got out of treatment, it was just natural for me to ask him to be my sponsor. And he sponsored some other guys, and his wife sponsored some women, and we just hung out at their house morning, noon, and night and just talked program, and went to meetings together and went out for coffee afterwards together. And I just feel like I got the best foundation anyone could possibly get.
All right, so dude, that's amazing. You because this is like old school treatment, and it still is out there today. This old school program stuff, but you're in the hospital, and does the hospital reach out to the local 12-step program? Like how does this man and woman who are both sober show up carrying the message?
That's a mystery. I don't know that answer. One of my doctors knew them apparently, and he must have given them my name and some background on me. But yeah, they showed up out of nowhere, and I didn't know them from Adam.
Man, so, and then, because for me, I went to treatment 30 days, and then this is, again, like 2011. They were like, yo, dude, like, you need to go somewhere else, And I was like, and that was the beginning of me actually taking advice, right? And I was just like, I finally had waved the white flag, or at least pretty much. And then I was like, all right, I'll go somewhere. So I went to a recovery house, halfway house. Ended up, this is after I met you, JD. I was working in the NBA. You think you're really just another bozo on the bus, but you think you're important. And then I get to this halfway house, and I'm working at a KFC. But everything, all this magic starts happening, because when you started to talk about hanging out with your sponsor and his wife, I get excited and juiced. Like, those are moments that you start to get that feeling, at least for me, where recovery gives you that juice, right? And it gives you that self-esteem that you thought you were getting from alcohol, but really it was just toying with your mind.
Absolutely.
And so
the crazy thing is that they got divorced years later, and she went back out drinking and died of cirrhosis of the liver. So thank goodness they were still sober when I got sober.
Yeah, I was reading your book, and you start off one chapter with that, and that shows how fleeting this is. When you were writing the book, a really good friend of yours had just relapsed, and it's like, man, we really do just have today, right?
Yeah. Well, I've had sponsors who relapsed, and in fact, I've had two sponsors. Sponsees. I've had sponsees who relapsed, and two of my sponsees have died.
Yeah.
Since then. So yeah, it's a very sobering thought.
When you, it truly is, and it makes me, just these kind of conversations make me dip into that gratitude, right? Just that I'm sitting here talking to another alcoholic today. Yeah, dude. And I can't believe it's John Delong. It's crazy for me. So you end up, you're going to meetings, and then how does the trajectory of who you are and how you feel about yourself start to change? And how does that intertwine into your career and what you're about to accomplish? Because I would imagine once you get sober, we really start to lift off, right? Emotionally, but also professionally.
Yeah, well, I was at the Winston-Salem Journal, and I was covering college basketball, college sports, college football, the golf beat, and the tennis beat, like that. And so I was very happy to be in that job, and they called me in and said, we're thinking of opening a bureau in Raleigh where you can cover State, Duke, and Carolina without having to drive 100 miles each way, like that. I'm like, okay, that's fine, whatever. If you do it, fine. If you don't do it, fine. And I was really working the third step. Say, God, if you want me to move to Raleigh, that's fine with me. If you want to keep me here in Winston, that's fine with me. And they called me in one day and said, you're not moving to Raleigh. And I said, oh, okay. And they said, you're moving to Charlotte. Like that. So that's another God doing for me what I could not do for myself. So I moved to Charlotte and started covering the Hornets at that point. And back then it was all 82 games, home and away, plus preseason games, home and away. And so actually in that time period, I had to cut my meetings back.
Yeah.
And, because you're in Boston one night, New York the next, back home for a couple nights, then down to Miami like that. Well, it's impossible to do meetings under that kind of schedule. I probably went to 10, 15 meetings a year in that stretch.
Okay, so how was that? How did you adjust to that? Because sometimes,
well,
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I always took the first step because I always said this crap has to end immediately, like that. So I knew how not to drink. But the truth of the matter is my sobriety took a back seat there for a while. And I was practicing these principles in 85% of my affairs, but not 100%.
Yeah.
Like that. So after the Hornets moved, like you say, with the Bobcat, I was covering them, but I wasn't covering them on the road or anything. And I don't even think I was covering them every night at home, but that forced me into the saying, the best years of my life were when I was really working the program. I've got to get back to where I'm really working the program again. And God made that happen through another bizarre story, so it's really amazing.
Can you tell, what's the other bizarre story?
Okay. Like I said, I grew up in Ohio, and I got an email from someone I used to party with up in high school. She had seen my picture in the newspaper and my email address, and she was writing to reconnect and let's get together for some coffee sometime. And I was petrified. I really was, because I couldn't remember, what all crazy things I might have done around her.
Yeah.
So I told her, yeah, we would get together for coffee. But in my heart, I was never going to do it. So anyway, her dad died, and I had known her dad from playing baseball with her brothers, and her dad died. And so I wrote her an email with my condolences and everything. And I said, I'm at a club where we work, where we share our experience, strength, and hope, like that.
Yeah.
I said, my experience is that you're going to go through a really tough time, but it will get better. And in the meantime, you'll get closer to the rest of your family, and something good will come out of it. She wrote me back saying, I know what club you're talking about, and I'm in that club too. I've been sober 12 years. So at that point, getting together for coffee became a must, and I started going to her home group, and that's when I fully got back into the program again. And it's been a fabulous journey ever since.
So there's so much to unpack here. This is so cool. I wish you could see me. I'm grinning ear to ear. So when you are, because I am, God, it's funny. Like, and this only happens talking to another sober alcoholic. I've been like, my sobriety has been kind of backseat right now, because I've just been, some gifts of sobriety, right? You can't let the gifts of sobriety get in the way of the gifts of sobriety. So I'm in the midst of trying to ratchet up my program amidst all this travel and stuff. When you were in that position, you're on the road with guys that I enjoyed, Rick Bonnell, Richard Walker, yourself, and I just know.
Leonard Blay.
Yeah, Leonard Blay, who Leonard was never opposed to having a couple cocktails. God bless him.
Absolutely.
He would certainly say that if he was here with us today. Those guys like to have a good time, and there's a camaraderie on the road. Amongst, especially, how cool was it back then? You guys had like 4 or 5 guys covering the team.
We would with Leonard, we would cover the game. Then we would go back to the hotel. We would go to the bar, and I would have the Diet Coke. Richard Walker would have 2 beers, and that was it. And Leonard would drink the rest of the night. We had all forms of alcoholism on display there. But, one thing about Leonard, he drank like a fish, but he never acted unruly.
Never.
getting a little butt, or a big.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, and he was such a cool guy for me to be around. I had one or two nights where I was, lucky enough, because at the time it was neat for me to be around Leonard, and we had a couple nights where we had some drinks, and he was just, stories for days, just like you have.
Yeah.
But how did you manage that nightlife? And because that's sort of a part of it, if I'm not mistaken, like being around, the camaraderie, right? And you learn stories. Yeah. You have to stay on top of everything. And back then, we're not talking so much about texting or social media. I mean, you have to be there to get the story. Was that difficult for you to always,
No,
okay.
The time I got the treatment that first day and found out about the first step, I have never been tempted. And I know that sounds interesting, but it's like the promises, the 10-step promises say we are neither cocky nor are we afraid, like that. And I was never tempted. I would drink my Diet Coke and I was glad that I wasn't like Leonard, and I was a bit jealous. Well, not jealous, but I was amazed that Richard could drink 2 beers and call it a night.
Yes. Yeah, me too. I mean, I totally understand that. And it's not jealousy. It's almost you're impressed. It's like, wow.
Yeah, impressed. That's the right word. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, man, this is impressive to me. So you have
after I quit drinking.
And you're on the road all the time. What were did people know you were sober? I mean,
yeah.
Okay, so you were pretty out there with it. Did any of the players you were covering know that you were sober? Because back then you did. It was different, man. I mean, for anybody that's younger that's listening to this, like being a beat writer was probably one of the coolest jobs in the world to have. I mean, you would really, part of your job was forging natural, authentic relationships with the subjects you covered, not to burn them, but to represent them, and to represent, the people that you're covering for, right? The paper you're covering for to get to these stories. Did you ever share your sobriety with a coach or a player?
Yeah, the coaches all knew. All Silas knew, in fact, because Paul Silas was probably a alcoholic too. And he told me stories about what he would do after the game. And he said one night he got so drunk that he couldn't figure out which one was his home. And he said, so he drove around the block a couple of times and said, well, I think this is my house. Like that, he said, but I was taking a chance because if a 6'7" black man barges into your house at 4 a.m, you got a problem there. He said, luckily, he got the house right, and he got his own house. But yeah, Paul was great about that. I don't think it's really shared it with the players, but I think probably Larry knew.
Larry Johnson?
Yeah, Larry Johnson and Bill Curry. I think they probably.
Who was your favorite guy to cover back on those teams? Larry
was the guy. Absolutely. We formed a good bond when he signed the big $84 million contract. He was on the Letterman show one night. And I flew up with him and went to Letterman and wrote a couple stories about the contract and being on Letterman and everything. And he always remembered that. And, Larry didn't like some of the members of the press, but he always treated me great.
What was that trip like? You fly up now. Are you on the same plane as Larry?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. He was in first class and I was in coach, but yeah, we were on the same plane and there was a limo to pick him up and everything. So the crazy part of that was Robin Williams was also on Letterman that night. And Robin Williams was promoting Mrs. Doubtfire. Larry was
Grandmama.
the time. So we get to the Letterman show, and they say, Robin Williams wants to meet Larry. So he came in, and they talked about dressing up like women all the way till the show started. So that was hilarious.
And so you were like in the green room, or you were there hanging out with them the whole time?
Yeah.
Man, amazing. Now, when you're on a trip like that, and part of the book is called "And My Name Is John: The Blessings of Sobriety." You can get it anywhere: Barnes and Noble, Amazon. When you're talking, or when you take these trips, were you able to thread meetings in there? Like, did you find a meeting in New York City? Like, I've been to like that Mustard Seed there, or like different meetings. Yeah. Would you break out and hit meetings when you were traveling, or was that?
I've been to Mustard Seed, but not while I was on the beach.
Okay.
Yeah, like I say, I cut back my meetings. I wasn't going to meetings on the road at all. So that's why I only got 10 to 15 meetings. I remember I would go to this one meeting maybe once a month, and I would, when it came my time to share, I would get all this fabulous sobriety that I thought I had, like that. Yeah. And afterwards, this little lady comes up and says, "Don't worry, son, it'll be okay eventually." She's like that. I thought I rattled off the best sobriety ever. So funny how that goes.
What did you learn about yourself over the course of your journey in sobriety? We're talking about 4 decades.
I think now I'm a pretty good person, and I like to help people, and I'm just living life the way I'm supposed to now. Like I said, that stretch where I was living 85% of my practicing 85% in my affairs. Now I'm at 100%. I am truly at 100%, and there's a lot of pride in that, I think.
Well, and then how do you go from the guy who I can relate to, who's not getting to the meetings and not getting that spiritual nourishment that is required or that we hope to have when we're going through this thing, so we're not white knuckling. And then how do you go from the guy who's not getting to meetings in New York to now you're going to the French Open and you're going to meetings in Paris? Was that around the same time, or was that after you turned the page, like you mentioned, and you reconnect with an old friend?
That's after I was off the Hornets beat. That came later. But that came after I said, damn it, I got to get in this program full bore again. Like I said, the best years of my life were when I was going to 1 million meetings a year, like that. And now I'm going 4 meetings a year. 4 meetings a week probably. And I'm sponsored a couple guys. So I'm back working the program the way it's supposed to be worked.
Are you in Charlotte?
I'm in Ohio right now for Christmas, but yeah, I still live in Charlotte.
Oh man, I got to link up with you if I get back there. I'd love to go to a meeting with you, man.
Fantastic, yeah. That would be great.
So some other neat anecdotes with the story. There's one thing you can't ignore when you're going through it about the skydiving cat, right? Like what you got to give me a little bit more on that, or the people that are listening. I do want to go. Your story is so amazing, and for me, it's so cool to be talking to John Delong about this because you and I were working in the same orbit. I was in your orbit, and I had no idea you were sober, but you did always have a very because look, dude, I was a young PR guy. It was my first job. My hair was on fire. I was hungover all the time. Scott Lightman was the PR director. He was out of his mind, all over me all the time. Oh, yeah. Scott and I actually had made an amends to him and to BJ Evans because, I was working for those guys and I was a nice guy and most people liked me. You're getting by BSing on a handshake and a smile. So people would say to Scott and BJ, like, man, why are you being so hard on Pete? And they were like, well, because Pete he can't tie up any of these loose ends we need him to. You know, he's kind of floating through life. But it was,
I had no idea back then that your drinking was the way it was.
Oh, man, I can remember.
You did take it pretty well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. But it was really cool to be around you. And it's even cooler now to know that, like, there was something to that aura because, you know, there was, it's so important to be able to break a story in somebody in your profession, in your career. But I don't know if it was at this point in your life or if you had, you know, we like to say you figured it out sobriety wise, but you had a much different demeanor than the other beat writers. You know, you were more aligned with like Richard Walker. Richard was, you would get the story, but there was not this frantic, nervous energy to him like there were among other people in that business because there's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. My job was to beat the Charlotte Observer. You know, they sent me down from Winston-Salem to Charlotte for one specific purpose, and that was to beat the Charlotte Observer. Because you look at the entire western part of the state, you got Charlotte up in the mountains and Winston-Salem up in the mountains, and they're all competing for that subscription, you know, like that. So, again, I was kind of laid back, and Richard, he's wired differently than me. Like I say, he could drink 2 beers and call it a night. But then Rick Bonnell was with the Observer. And anyone who's been around Rick Bonnell knows you want to kick his butt. You know? I was motivated by that, but I love my job. You know, I absolutely loved it. I loved the travel. I loved, I started doing radio there on Pac-Man's show.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was a lot of fun. So that kept me going, yeah.
What did you feel? And it is kind of cool, even though you said, you know, you weren't hitting the meetings like you know, we need to, or at least I need to, and you say you need to. How did you handle the pressure of, you know, you wake up in the morning and you got to beat the Observer, and Larry Johnson just got a huge contract, and now Alonzo Mourning is bitching about his, and every day there's a different soap opera to cover. That was a really interesting time and a really cool team to cover. How did you handle and navigate the pressure of that time?
Well, I didn't feel that much pressure to begin with, but I did. I treated it like a soap opera. I treated it big picture, like there's always going to be some player who isn't getting enough playing time and he's unhappy. There's always going to be somebody who's scored 28 that night. You know, Glenn Rice, he carried me for a couple of years because he would be up 35, 40 points a night, you know, like that. But yeah, I didn't feel that much pressure. I really didn't. And I guess part of that is I got enough scoop that it kept me going, and people in Winston were very happy with me. So I didn't feel the pressure. I really didn't.
Well, dude, you were a legend. Now, I was from Philadelphia coming to Charlotte, but one of my best friends, a brother of mine pretty much still to this day, is John Tobias, who you might remember. He was worked game nights with the Bobcats, and now he's got like his own empire working with, he's a teacher at UNC Charlotte. He's created this whole company to get underserved, underrepresented kids into the sports field. But he was like, oh my gosh, he was from Winston-Salem, and he would be like, John DeLong is like, the guy delivers the Bible to us every morning, because they did feel like they felt like they were getting the meat that folks that read the Observer were getting, which had to feel, there was a lot of pride in that, I think, for the people of Winston-Salem.
Wow. Well, you're so kind to say that. I did a pretty good job. And again, it's like, I'm neither cocky nor am I afraid, you know, like that. So that's kind of the way I looked at it.
What was the biggest, something you can share, but a piece of drama that I got, and I got another question I want to ask you how you covered something, but I want to ask you this first. What was like a story that you were like, gosh, I can't believe I'm a sports writer, but I have to cover this and keep an eye on this. Something that was kind of off the court and just like, you're like, wow, I didn't know this was going to be in the description.
yeah, when Bobby Phills died, that just devastated everyone.
Yeah, and that was almost exactly 25 years ago, JD, I think.
Yeah. And so, it was a bad feeling since you're trying to go through your own grief. But here you are, you got to write a story about it. You got to talk to the guys on the team about what Bobby meant to them and everything. And I felt kind of like a leech, and the game was wound up being that their first game back was against the Knicks up in Madison Square Garden. And I remember all the New York press came in and they had no compassion for Bobby Phills at all. They were looking for that quote that said he was speeding or whatever they wanted, like that. And that's the only time I've really been ashamed to be a writer, But yeah, that's probably the one that sticks out the most.
Yeah, I mean, for people that don't know, Bobby Phills leaves a shoot around, and the day of a game, obviously, and crashes his car and dies. Right? Is that? Am I?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And there were folks that saying he was racing with a teammate, and so there was like, like you mentioned, those guys in New York that people wanted to find out exactly what had happened, but with very, very little bedside manner, which sucks. But it sucks.
That's the New York media for you, though.
Yeah. Was any other anecdote? By the way, so let's go back to the cat. I got sidetracked. So, what about the skydiving drunk cat? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I had moved from High Point to Winston-Salem, and I got my first house, which was a townhome that had 3 different levels to it. So a friend talked me into getting a cat. So I got this cat, and he would go up on the loft like 25 feet up from the sunken living room. I had a sunken living room, and then I have a loft overlooking it. And he would go up to the top of the loft, and he would jump, and he would fly through the air and land on my couch. And he would get up and strut around like he'd just done the neatest thing in the world. And then he'd go back up and he would jump again, and he would hit the couch again, and he eventually he would jump off the loft and miss the
Oh, no.
It was on the coffee table or on the floor. And eventually, he was doing it more. He was hitting the floor more than he was hitting the couch. And he wound up dying of internal injury. And the comparison I make to an alcoholic is, he loved the rush. He absolutely loved the rush, and he would do it over and over and over again, the way we drink over and over and over again. And finally, he started hitting the ground and hurting himself. But by then it was too late. Before he realized the insanity of jumping off the loft, it was too late. He wound up dying of internal injury.
It reminds me of the story of the jaywalker, right? In our book.
Yeah, keeps running in front of cars, gets hit, breaks numerous bones, and keeps on doing it. That's the way the cat was. His name was Gonzo Jr. My nickname in those days, in my drinking days, was Gonzo because of Hunter S. Thompson and Gonzo journalism.
Yeah.
Familiar with Hunter S.
Thompson? Oh, yeah. I mean, the guy spent like a year with the Raiders, Fear and Loathing. Yeah.
He would get screwed up, and then he would start writing whatever popped into his head. Well, I was intrigued by that, so they started calling me Gonzo because of Hunter S. Thompson.
Were you fueled a little by that, like being a part of like the counterculture? Like you weren't like the regular buttoned up writer. You were a little different.
I only did that on the side. I didn't, like I say, I never got drunk and wrote and covered a game or anything like that. But it was nice to have a nickname, and it was nice to have a lovable nickname, and everyone loved Gonzo back then. So I was a happy drunk. I really was. I did some ridiculous things. I did stuff I'll never live down. But basically, I was a happy drunk.
Yeah, and it's like, right, and that's all like, but you almost killed yourself. And that's the thing. Like, even if you are, like, if you're listening to this and you're cut from a different cloth and you can't stop drinking, and that different cloth has you as a happy drunk, you can still die, you know? And that's you're a real reflection of that, because I would never see you as like a spiteful, angry guy. All right, one more thing for you as we come up to the hour here. You write this book. What did it mean for you? This is your first book. You could have written about a lot of stuff, dude. You could have written a book about, you know, Dean Smith or Michael Jordan or Larry Johnson. You chose to write about getting sober and your journey and how you carry the message today. Putting it all on paper, what did that do for you?
Well, you know, when I covered the Hornets, I was writing 500 stories a year. I was writing 2 stories a day or sometimes 3 stories a day, all basketball. So it hit me. I was getting a little stale writing basketball all the time. I said, what do you want to do that you're really passionate about? And by then I was back in the program full bore. And I said, I'm more passionate about my sobriety than I am anything. So it started out as a blog. So I wrote some entries to the blog. Then I started writing short stories and compiled them all in this book. So, it all came from saying, what am I passionate about?
Did you get a real good response? Because there was a point, at least, and maybe it's because you and I had linked up on Facebook, but I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I didn't know you were sober, like I said, and you started to share about that. Was there, like, what was the reaction you got when you started to sort of post stuff and with the blog? Were you surprised by how people received that? Because I was like overjoyed.
Wow. Yeah, I got a good response. And the book, it sold a lot early. It's going through a little lull period right now, and that's why I appreciate you giving me the forum here to talk about it.
Oh, dude, yeah. I mean, my pleasure. And here's the deal, too. Like, you know, hopefully, usually a good amount of people listen to this podcast. So we'll put the link to the book. And My Name is John, The Blessings of Sobriety by John DeLong. We'll put that here in the show notes. And I mean, and I'm also, I have a show, you know, I call games now for ESPN basketball. It's funny. Like I work with, I worked just the other night with Scott Williams, you know, from North Carolina. I'm sure you covered him. It's fun because, and Scott knows I'm sober, and we go to grab something to eat. This is a great, like, Richard Walker moment. We go to get something to eat afterwards, and he's like, I'm like, you gonna have something to drink? You know, we're sitting at the bar and at a restaurant in Utah, and he's like, no. I'm like, you're not? He's like, no. I'm like, it's a Saturday night. I'm like, come on, drink up. He's like, I'm good. And Scott's become my friend, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Like, you always have those reminders, like, people don't drink like I drank, you know?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's not the most important thing in the world. All right, well, look, dude, this book is so important. JD, man, I appreciate it, and I'm going to be in touch. This podcast will go up pretty soon, so I'll shoot you the link when it goes up so you can share it and stuff.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, man, it's I mean, what a treat. I mean, this conversation here is one of the blessings of sobriety. So, man, I appreciate you, John.
Very good. We'll have a Merry Christmas, Pete.
You too, man. I'll be in touch. All right, brother?
All righty. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, John. See you, bud.
Goodbye.
Thanks so much for listening to The Payoff with Pete. Once again, I'm Pete Souza. And of course, we are part of the Rogue Media Network. All kinds of good podcasts you can find at roguemedianetwork.com. And of course, you can find this podcast and all those other ones wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, other spots like that.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.